Now, the wearing of masks is set to be a personal choice from July the 19th, but some pubs, restaurants and shops say they will still encourage customers to wear them. Meanwhile, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has said it is reckless to lift this requirement to wear masks on public transport. Well, I'm pleased to say that Andy Burnham joins us now from Lee. Mr Burnham, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Boris Johnson, in Prime Minister's questions earlier on today, refuted the accusation that his plans were reckless, and he gave his reasons behind that. What did you make of it? Because you have yourself called his plans reckless.
Well, I should start by saying I broadly support the roadmap and the approach the government is taking, but I do think they've gone a step too far with the removal of the requirement to wear masks, particularly on public transport. But there is a question there about whether they should be required in essential retail as well. And that's because this isn't a matter of individual freedom, as it's been said around Freedom Day. One person's freedom is another person's loss of freedom, because if you're somebody who has a compromised immune system, or somebody who's travelling by public transport for their chemotherapy, they will be put in a very difficult position. And I don't think it's too much to ask at this stage, knowing that people don't like wearing masks, but nevertheless, this is about still looking after everybody as we go through the later stages of this pandemic. And I think the government went too far in removing the requirement to wear masks. And I know that Freedom Day for some will be loss of Freedom Day for others.
So what would you like to see stay? You mentioned the wearing of masks on public transport and in essential retail, for example. So I'm presuming you mean things like chemists and supermarkets. Is there anything else you would like to see stay for the foreseeable future?
Well, that is the main thing. And I think the difference is places that people go by choice. So if people are going to go to bars, restaurants, or even nightclubs come the 19th of July, that is a choice, and you know where you're going into and you're aware of the risks. There are many people in Greater Manchester who have no choice but to use public transport or to go into the shops that you mentioned, essential retail. And I think that's a very different thing when people are in that environment. And I think it's unfair that some people may feel now very uncomfortable in that environment, or worse, not even able to go in there and use those facilities. So I think that is where the government has got things wrong. More broadly, as I say, I can see a lot of logic in what they are doing. And of course, we do have to learn to live with the virus and return as much as we can to normal life. The risk, though, of course, is if you remove all the restrictions and the requirements, it kind of suggests, or it sends a message that we're back to normal, that we're out of the pandemic. And of course, that isn't the case. And I do have a concern that later in the year, the government will have to backtrack in some way if we see a rising cases or a new variant or some other change in the way things are evolving.
Mr Burnham, perhaps you can remind us what the situation is in Greater Manchester at the moment. I understand infection numbers are going up, but at a slower rate than the national average.
Yes, I mean, infection rates are going up in each of our 10 boroughs. And the rate of increase has slowed, as you say, but they're still high. There's no getting away from that. And that is why we are in a different position. And it's why I do have some concerns about what's been announced. But as elsewhere, the link between hospitalisation is broken to some considerable degree, not completely, because there are still people in hospital and those numbers have increased, but it's not the same as we saw in 2020 or indeed early 2021. So, it's a difficult thing, I think, when you have the government saying we could be up to 100,000 cases a day in a few weeks' time, as the Health Secretary said this week. Oh, and by the way, we're removing all restrictions. I think the kind of contradiction there has caused some uncertainty and some unease amongst our residents. And I do think when the Prime Minister goes to the liaison committee today, I do think he needs to be asked about this and to give the evidence as to why this is a step that we're able to take at this stage.
Yeah, nice of you to mention that. That promo is our 3:30 taking of that live here on Sky News. You can watch it. Plenty of questions for the Prime Minister to answer. I want to talk about education because obviously there's the July 19th date, but there's also been this date of August the 16th put in people's diary self-isolation is going to continue up until that date, and that has a big impact on young people and schools. What are your thoughts on the self-isolation restrictions and when they're being lifted? And what are you thinking about school bubbles coming to an end? Do you support the measures that are going to have an effect on education?
I certainly know that there's been a bit of an intake of breath around the August date for the end of self-isolation. And, that definitely feels too soon here. Given that, as I just said, the Health Secretary is predicting cases at 100,000 a day later this month or into next month. So that seems, again, an odd decision. I would be saying to the government they should be going the opposite way, giving more support for people to self-isolate who need to do so. There is a different situation in schools where much of the cases is related to people with no illness, so that people with, who are asymptomatic. And the situation in schools had become unsustainable. So I do think the Education Secretary was right to announce the changes that he has. It's a period of uncharted territory that we're going into. No one quite knows now how things are going to unfold over the coming weeks. And I think we still have to err on the side of caution, and hence my kind of concern at some of what's been announced. But I do think the position in schools have definitely become unsustainable. And I know it's been broadly welcomed, the changes that the Education Secretary has announced.
How frustrating is it for you to be Mayor of Greater Manchester at the moment? Because obviously we're talking about powers going to regions so you can make your own decisions. But in an instance like this, the Prime Minister is almost saying to you, make up your own mind, make up your own decisions, but you have no authority, if you see what I mean, in terms of if you want to enforce masks on public transport in Greater Manchester or in shops. You can't really, you can only advise people. So what are you saying to the people of Greater Manchester today ahead of these two key dates?
It is difficult, Sarah Jane. I do think you're right to point to that, because when a statement is made by the government, it's hard for us to take a different position, particularly given here, we only control the tram system. So we can only, if we wanted to, we can only enforce masks there. We can't enforce them on buses or trains because of the way transport is organised outside of London. I think there's more ability to enforce in London than we have. So that makes it very hard, because obviously it's a recipe for confusion or tension if we try to do that. And it is a bit frustrating, again, that there was no genuine consultation with us about this change, given that we have to deal with the consequences on public transport of this change. So I have kind of been in a position all through the pandemic where governments have imposed things on us without talking to us. We had that from the Scottish government recently, where they introduced a travel ban, which we succeeded in having overturned. But I do think this says something about how this country is governed. I think we do need to see more consultation with people at a regional level, so that we can help the government make sense of its obligations or its instructions on the ground. And 18 months into this pandemic, we're still in a position where we sometimes find what's said quite frustrating. Yeah,
I know that you and the other regional mayors were not consulted at all on the Prime Minister's plans that he announced. You found out like the rest of us. I'm going to go to our political editor, Beth Rigby, shortly, because we are looking ahead to this liaison committee where Boris Johnson is going to face more questions. What would you like to see him answer today? What's your burning question for the Prime Minister?
I think the burning question is reassuring people that it is safe to do what has been announced, given where cases are. But I think he also needs to give MPs a sense of the backup plan. What if it doesn't go in the way that we hope it will go? Because I do think that can't be an unanswered question. This can't be irreversible, as he said, because we may not be in a position to do that. I would also like to see him address other issues, like the support for young people coming out of this pandemic. I was disappointed recently when I saw the government, completely ignore the recommendations of Sir Keir Starmer, because I think the next generation is going to need a lot of support to recover from this. I was pleased to hear the Education Secretary say yesterday that the government was supporting face-to-face teaching in our universities come the autumn and the new academic term. But that says to me that the government should recognise that young people haven't had that over the last year in universities. And they've spent over £9,000 in tuition fees for not having what they should have, which is face-to-face learning. And I want to see the government prioritising young people and making reparation to young people coming out of this pandemic. And I would say to them, they should give all young people who've paid full tuition fees for the academic year 2020-21 a 50% rebate on those fees. Because actually, this younger generation has given so much, I think, in terms of life chances and lost opportunity through this pandemic. And I've not yet heard from the Prime Minister or any minister how they are going to help this younger generation kind of repair the damage, get their lives back on track coming out of this pandemic. And I hope some MPs on the liaison committee start to ask him some serious questions about this, as well as questions about how he is going to make levelling up a real thing coming out of this pandemic, and not just a scheme that benefits some favoured places rather than places that will really need his support.